my dearies, it's time for another Candlelight Tale. I figured since St. Patrick's Day is in 2 days that I would probably do something Irish, and of course the Irish has some wonderful legends. My mother was a Fraser, and so I kind of understand the romantic and very creepy spooks and mystical things of Ireland. Tonight I want to tell you a story about Ian Fraser. Ian Fraser had a wonderful farm in Ireland. It was extremely productive, probably one of the more productive potato farms in Ireland in the late 1600s. Only each year the potatoes seemed to get more and more blighted, and pretty soon there was a famine. People were starving, and he had done well for himself, but even having a wife and 5 children, the burden was too much. One year he had issues with the fences being broken down, and when the fences broke down, the sheep would get into the yard and they would begin to dig around where the potatoes were and ruin the plants. And so they had to rebuild the fences again, and his 3 sons and his 2 daughters would help. And they would try to keep the garden happy and healthy as much as they could. They even prayed over the land, hoping it would be more productive, because none of their neighbors were having any luck with growing. And from what they understood, the whole entire country was having issues. Next year, he thought, okay, this will be a different year. It's surely it's gonna be better this year. It can't always be bad. And that year, they planted the garden. The fences were fine. But then suddenly the animals got riled up. And the sheep were running through the yard, and they were baying, and the dogs were running around and digging up the ground and acting all strange. And so they started putting them in the stables at night. They didn't understand what's wrong with the animals. Why are they so upset? And finally Mary, Ian's wife, sat him aside one night while she was knitting, and she said, "Ian, you do realize it's the Pookas." And Ian, big, strong, strapping Irishman, did not want to admit that something that was just a fairy could cause so much havoc, but his entire country was going down, and his own farm was having issues. And Mary reminded him, "You know the Pookas, they try to disrupt farms. They knock down fences, they upset the animals, and Ian, dear, worst of all, they'll call in the night, and if you come to see who's calling, they'll take you and you'll never be seen again. Do you want one of our 5 children to go missing like that?" Well, they already had empty bellies, and he had lost almost all of his money, and they were trying so hard to make it work. But those Pookas, the Pookas had to be the reason Ireland was going down. So Ian Fraser, he got his family together, and he told them, "We are going to this land called America, where there's more land than you can imagine. You can claim any part of the fertile earth you want, and nothing will ever be blighted." And all the children cheered and said, "Yes, let's go to this magical place called America." So Ian got everything together, and he sold off the farm, and he gathered up all of his potatoes, because he had been growing these potato eyes over and over every year, and so he knew he had good crop. He just had bad land, and he had Pookas. So he gathered up, he dug up all of his potatoes, he put them into a big sack, he put it on the ship. They all rode to America. It was a miserable experience. They lost a lot of weight. They were sickly, a little bit weak when they got there. But when they saw the land and they claimed their stake, they were a very happy family. And the Frasers were celebrating and cheering and ready to plant their new crop. And so Ian Fraser pulled out his potatoes, cut them up, put them into the ground. He said a blessing, and they grew and grew and grew. And it looked like it was going to be the best harvest of potatoes that he had ever had in all of his time in Ireland. Surely it's because this land's never been used before, and it hasn't been drained of all of its energy and all of its vital nutrients. And the family celebrated, and they slaughtered a sheep, and they had a very, very happy party, and they celebrated. They were getting very close to harvest time when one night he heard a sound out in the yard, and he went out with his eldest son, Ian Jr., and he found the fence had been broken down. And they wondered, maybe it was one of the horses that knocked it, so they put it back up. They didn't think anything of it. It was getting days away from harvest. It was so promising, and Ian tried very hard not to pull the potatoes up before their time. But that night, They all went to sleep, and they were awakened by the sound of all the animals in the yard going crazy. They were all barking and baying and neighing at the same time, and it sounded like the world was ending. And Ian Jr. once again ran out into the yard, and they gathered up all the animals and put them into the stalls. And then Ian Jr. turned to his father and said, "Papa, this reminds me of Ireland. Do you think we have Pookas?" And Ian shook his head. "No, of course not. The Pookas can't be here. They're only in Ireland. That's their land. They wouldn't be here." But then as Ian went to sleep that night, he lay there wide awake. He couldn't sleep. He knew they were just 2 days away from harvest. And yet the land was acting as if there's Pookas. And as he was trying so hard to fall asleep, he heard in the distance in the woods the sound of someone calling. He got up and he went to the window. He still heard it, so he went out to the door and he went out on the porch. And it was certainly a voice calling, and he very much wanted to go to it, when his wife Mary came up behind him and tugged on his gown and said, "Darling, don't follow the voice. You'll never be seen again. You'll be gone. It's a Pookas." And Ian said, "No, it's not the Pookas." So they went back to bed. And as they lay there both wide awake, not willing to sleep yet because they were very uncomfortable and anxious, Mary turned to Ian and said, "Darling, it's in the potatoes. It's in the land. We brought Ireland with us. We brought our earth with us. We brought the Pookas." So Ian woke up Ian Jr. They dug up all of the potatoes. They had the most beautiful, lush crop they had ever had in all of their years of farming. And they lit it afire. And they released the Pookas.